There are three institutions that have ATMs there. And on a weekend, especially by moral suasion, encourage the banks to do that because there's no teeth in what you have indicated to be the ATM's operating principles. What measures are you going to put in place to ensure that the consumers who have been denied access to the physical presence of the banks by their closing them are now...
We have to rely on information that the banks provide us, not just on ATMs, but on every piece of data that we know to do with how they run their business. And we have to assume that they report to us honestly. So what we have seen is the beginning of an improvement in an amount of the number of ATMs that are up and working, and the amount of the time it takes, a decrease in the time it takes to fix ATMs when they go down. Now, we didn't have a very long period to see it before Beryl struck. It was about 3 or 4 months that we published in the newspaper, and then Beryl struck. So I could say that it's not...
No. So just to say that in relation to the dormant accounts, banks have not been charging dormant account fees for years. Right? It's that practice ceased at least 2 to 3 years ago. It's a pre-COVID phenomenon. So it's the reason and the rationale that was proffered when we did ask them had to do with the cost of compliance in ensuring that those accounts were not subject to internal fraud. Which was a typology that was being picked up by players in the market in previous periods, and some of which have become notable cases in court. So since that period, which I would say I think the uptime now has gone into the low 80s, and the number of ABMs, particularly in the western part of the island, which is still recovering, trying to get electricity and data, those are still coming up. So the amount of ABMs that are operational are in the low 80s at the moment.
No,
Yes, yes, the proportion.
on ABMs?
You're going to end up having a slew of mics turned on. So, yes, you'd have to turn off.
Yeah, I want to ask about monetary policy.
You would have to turn off Member Hilton in order for Member Guy to get the follow-up question. So, Member Guy, you're on? No, no. Member Guy, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank
Member
you, Leader.
Golden, turn
Thank you,
yours
Tony.
on.
The matter of the ABMs, you have given us a figure which is 95% of them are operating, and that is more or less reflective of what was a pre-burial event. We recognize that certainly because of the electricity and the data, the internet challenges, that will be less than that. But my comments were specifically pre-burial. And my concern is how can we ensure that what they are telling us is actually so, and how do we ensure that we do not inconvenience the consumers? And I speak specifically of a rural township where there are 3 institutions that have ABMs. There are actually 4 ABMs because one has 2 in that particular locale. But on occasions, all 3 go down, and the primary reason for that is that there are no funding, no money in the ABM. And the point is that, if I do recall, in part of your standard was that they should have their suppliers or whoever replenishing money within a particular period of time. This is not done. So on Saturday, there is no money, and this is not replenished until about Monday morning, Monday afternoon. It's you don't have a bank to go to, and the bank that operates nearby tells you that the only thing that they operate, they don't deal with money there. Exactly. So whereas we're depending on the banks to tell us the information, I think it is incumbent on the BOJ to trust, but to verify.
Sure. So should I?
Member Golding, your mic is
Well,
on.
I wasn't sure if they want.
Yeah, just in quick response to the concerns, what I would say is that the uptime that is captured in the statistic is a function of whether the ABM can accept deposits and dispense cash. So the statistic does capture its availability to provide at least those basic services to members of the public, assuming that the machine is fitted to, for example, receive deposits. Not all ABMs have that as a function. What I would also say is that the entities report to us on a monthly basis. We will go through a process of doing an evaluation, particularly of where we see extremes, meaning entities that are performing extremely well, or perhaps entities that are performing extremely poorly. That will take time, though, to come to that evaluation. In the meantime, we do leverage mirror data. So most of the banks subscribe to a company called JETS, and they produce reports that are linked to the back end of the ABM systems. So we can verify by looking at mirror data the extent to which there is a discrepancy between what is being reported to us via their reports to us on a monthly basis and what we can get live. So we do have a trust but verify. That's a natural disposition of the supervisor, is always to trust but verify. And where you see gaps, you require a remediative action. We do see the concern, in terms of the performances, where ABMs run out of cash, the SLS is that they should be replenished in urban areas within 60 minutes and within rural areas in 3 hours. We do know that entities have not been able to comply with that initially, and hence we had given 6 months for entities to make the necessary arrangements with third parties to put themselves in a position so to do. So these are issues that are traveling with us, and we are a few months into the standard. It was published in April, end of April. So it's still a very new standard, and the entities still are arranging themselves to bring themselves into compliance with the various provisions there.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Governor, in your presentation and subsequent answers, you gave the data in relation to the gross reserves, both the relatively current figure and the movement in gross reserves over a period of time. I think you began slightly before COVID. And I'm just wondering, in the terms of the net international reserves, if you could give us that data as well, what the most current NIR position is, and what the movement in net international reserves has been over the last 3 or 4 years. That's one question I had. I have another question, which is to do with the impact of a sustained period of tight monetary policy on the economy generally. I think you began this process of moving the policy rate upwards. Was it in 2022 you started? 2021, okay. In October or thereabouts, I couldn't remember what year. So that was moving from, I think, 0.5%, which it had been for some time, and it reached 7% fairly quickly. I mean, it was over time, but, so what I'm wondering is, to what extent is that metric, together with the other of the 3 policy levers that you have to try and control inflation, and the assertive use of those to achieve your bringing inflation back within the band, to what extent do you think that is impacting on overall economic activity, and in particular real GDP growth, which remains in Jamaica's case quite low? And so that's a second question. And the third question I had, and the final one, is, do you see an anomaly if the target range of inflation is over the medium to long term materially higher than the policy rate and rates of interest offered to savers in the country, which is to some extent impacted by the policy rate as a lever? I know that we have had in the past long periods of time where the inflation rate has been higher than the policy rate. But typically, one theoretically expects that persons are getting a positive rate of return on their savings in real terms. And although market distortions, such as the oligopolistic control of the banking sector by relatively few players, can impact on that theoretical construct. But I'm just interested from your perspective on how you see that relationship between long-term policy and savings rates, which are tied loosely to that, and the inflation band that you're seeking, which you don't set, but you do recommend, as I understand it. Yeah, so those are my 3 questions. The NIR, the impact of 3 years of aggressive monetary policy, tight monetary policy on the economic activity, and in particular real economic growth, and the relationship over the long term between interest rates, savings rates really, what I mean, and the target band for inflation?
Yeah. The NIR, I start with that one. It's just factual. The NIR at June is very close to the gross. There's very little debt that is owed that has an immediate repayment. Yeah. Is it one, Robert? To not qualify as debt? About a year. Yeah. So the gross and the net are almost the same. The question of yes, no. Let's talk about what we call a neutral rate, which is the rate that we conceptually want to sit at because it's neither encouraging nor discouraging of growth. And I think that what we are learning and what we are seeing in the current environment is that that neutral rate is a little higher than what we perceived of it in the previous period. I mean, recall in pre-pandemic, worldwide, rates were really very low for a sustained period of time. And inflation was very low too, so the kind of neutral rate was low. I think looking forward and seeing how sticky inflation has been in coming down, I'd say that our view is that the neutral rate is going to be somewhat higher than it was pre-pandemic. And so what that means is that generally interest rates are not likely to go as low as they were pre-pandemic. So coming to your question of the corridor of 4 to 6%, you can see, and you're right, there is a connection there. And we would, as we see it now, we would rather a higher neutral rate than to find ourselves in a situation where our rates are lower than inflation. So that's our general outlook. As inflation abates, then I would say that our outlook on the neutral rate would also change somewhat. So yes, I think that generally 7% is not encouraging policy rate, and we do want to see it come down. And I do think that it does have some impact, certainly on capital markets and money markets. The DTIs have shown it's less impactful to them and retail credit, business credit. But generally, I think we would like to see that rate come off. Well, no, credit continues to grow, but not as strongly. So we have found that in the last couple of quarters, am I right, Jide? Loan growth has come down somewhat, but remains positive. So it's not like we're having negative loan growth. We're having positive loan growth, but it is not the 12% that it used to be. It's more in a region of about 7%.
Let me take the last two questions. Mike's on. First, it will be Member Hilton, then Member Miller. You will both ask your questions, and then the Governor will respond. Member Miller, I don't think you were before. Member Hilton, turn your mic off and on again. Member Hilton, you go first. Member Miller, turn your mic on.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Governor, there's an aspect of your report that I remain concerned about, and I don't think we've paid enough attention to, which is that among the, well, you spoke about the MPC and what it looks at in terms of its assessment of how to move on interest and the policy rates. And among the things you said is that it's assessment on the headwinds, what is happening not only locally, but globally. The US, which plays an oversized, to my mind, an outsized role in inflation globally, particularly and certainly for us. Their rates have been coming down, and my sense of it is that that has had an impact on our rates as well, and certainly on the tools and the use of the tools that you have at the MPC. One of them is the imported inflation, which is, to my mind and my experience, have to do with supply chain issues globally. There's instability in the global market, impacting supply chain, whether it's with the war in Middle East, and even perhaps even the recent cyber effects on this, on the system recently that caused airline, banks, and everybody to be a hiccup. Are you, and yet you had indicated that there are some things outside the control that the MPC doesn't account for, or doesn't influence its action, or wouldn't influence its action. Is supply chain management one of those concerns, and how that will impact on imported inflation?
Yes, so you're perfectly correct. 60% of or more of what we consume in Jamaica is imported. And because of that, we are price takers. And because of that too, the issue of the exchange rate in managing inflation is very important. And generally speaking, over the last, I would say 12 months, we have seen international commodity prices come off. And that has played a big role in helping us to manage inflation down. But we also have what I call internal or domestic driven inflation. And that has to do with, an item is more expensive to consume, so you put up your price, whether it is the price of labor or just the price of what you are selling. So there is a kind of internal dynamic that we have to manage. And that's what I call a secondary round effect. And what we are trying to do is it doesn't sound so good, but we're trying to compress the economy, tighten it up so that demand is not as intense, and therefore the second round effect is not as powerful as if liquidity was available and people could get credit as they wish, and the prices could go up and you simply borrow to accommodate it. We're trying to do the opposite of that. So we have to be careful. We need the help of international commodity prices, but we also have to keep domestic demand pretty tight. And once that is buttoned down, then we can start to relax the interest rates. The Fed has not moved one iota yet and has not given any formal intention that they are they intend to move. We have said that we see the trend, we like the trend, and we have actually done something practically by loosening liquidity, opening up liquidity, and bringing money market rates down. So just as we were ahead of the Fed in tightening, we are somewhat ahead of the Fed in beginning to loosen.
Member Miller. Member
Yeah.
Miller, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Governor. The question that I have is, I understand the need for the ATM services. Also, we understand the wire transfer system that is available to depositors. However, the two major banks in Portmore, in particular NCB Scotia, they have gone cashless for quite some time. And I would want to know the rationale behind it and what can be done to revert what is being implemented now, because it caused some issues, especially in Portmore, in terms of persons who are willing to do commerce on the spot, delay, will acquire more costing, etc. Persons have limited that they can use at the ATM machine, etc. What can be done in that regard to eliminate the cashless bank system?
Right. So when banks say they're going cashless, it should mean that the teller service, the service of coming into a physical location and interacting with a human, that is a teller, that service is terminated. I believe that's what banks regard cashless branches as being. They need to have provided alternative means of dispensing cash, and that is they should have ATM machines either in the location of the bank or near, so that clients, customers can get the cash even if they can't come into the branch. For a bank to go cashless, Jide can support me on this, they have to get the non-objection of the Bank of Jamaica. Is that right? So they would have applied to the bank and said, I want this branch to go cashless. I have made accommodation for ATM machines to handle the situation. Do I have your non-objection? And with the comfort that they have put in place ATM machines, we would not have objected, because banks are generally on a drive to try to reduce the cost of operations. I don't know if that has... Yes, and this is one of the problems, that you have some businessmen who use the ATMs to draw gigantic sums of money, which empty the ATMs. So banks have, by and large, not every one of them, and not all locations have set up limits that you can withdraw. I can only say that people who want very large sums of cash, I have to question what are they doing with very large sums of cash. We have a lot of digital means of payment. Yes, but there are many digital ways of paying workers, and we want to encourage that. Yeah, but the problem that we have is that a lot of AML issues arise from people wanting 250,000 of cash from this machine, 250,000 from that machine. It runs into AML CFT issues. Yeah. Can I say that the... Yes.
Member, if your mic is not on, you're not. You are not to engage in asking any questions. So members, when you're asking a question, if you would like to be allowed a follow-up question, you do not turn off your mic. If you turn your mic off, it's an indication that you are finished with your question and you have nothing to follow up and you're comfortable. And once you have heard the response, it means you are not in the queue to continue to speak. And it is not appropriate to speak unless your mic is on.
Madam Speaker, could I say, I've been to Cabinet a couple of times and I've been to Parliament a couple of times, and I've heard this complaint every time, and I'm sure that it is substantial and it is true. I'd like to say that if members wish to communicate directly with me and let me know of instances, I will speak to the banks, the particular banks involved, and have them address it. So in speaking of that information about ATM uptime and all of that, big criticism is that that data is very general and not specific. And what I'm suggesting is, until we can build some confidence in that data, anyone who wants to WhatsApp me, call me, email me about specific instances or locations where banks and ATMs are not working properly, I will take it up and I will deal with the banks, because I've heard this complaint enough times to know that it is a profound problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor.
Yes, we'll have to.
Members, the report.
Yes, a helpline.
Difference to Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance, we are closing.
Just a minute. Thank you for your patience, Chair. Just, the institutional role of the BOJ, their mandate is to pursue stable, low inflation in a credible environment. And, this is little Jamaica that's embarked in this direction a few years ago. And I think, Chair, it would not be out of order to encouragement sweetens labor. And with the results so far of, this must be certainly the first time since we have had our own central bank where we're seeing an inflation wave be moderated in such a quick manner. I mean, the data is available for anybody to look at, and I think that should be, it's not over, it's not done, but it should be recognized, I believe. And hopefully, that would open and usher in new sort of expectations going forward for decades to come, that this is something that our society too can absorb and through independent central bank moderate more quickly than we have in the past.
Thanks, Minister. The report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House of Representatives, on the monetary policy statement covering the 6 months ended March 2024, supported by the quarterly monetary policy report, February 2024, volume 24, number 3, and the quarterly monetary policy report, May 2024, volume 24, number 4 is before me. Is it the wish of the committee that I sign it? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Let me say thank you to the team from the Bank of Jamaica for being here with us today. This committee meeting now stands adjourned.